Started tonight. Thank you so much for being here for our Wednesday night Bible study. It is the beginning of our summer series, and we're extremely excited about that. I will tell you a little bit more about our speaker coming up. Right now, as we get started, I have a few announcements to tell you about. First off, all Bible classes are back resumed now, Sunday morning and Wednesday night. We are back to normal on classes. We are excited about that. So make plans to be here this Sunday. That's a brand new routine for some of us, and maybe it's not brand new, but it's been over a year since we were here at 9:30. So Bible class starts at 9:30, worship at 10:30. Kingdom Kids class does begin tonight, runs throughout the summer quarter. That is for 4-year-olds through 5th grade. They'll meet in the basement. We do have toddler classes available as well, so all of our kids have classes. Junior high and up are all going to be here in the auditorium for summer series. Don't forget, next Wednesday night we'll eat together again. Man, we had a fantastic meal tonight. And it was great to kick that off, to see the basement full and enjoy some great food. We'll do that again next Wednesday night. Agave's is catering, so we'll have the Agave's Mexican restaurant catering that. We do need you to sign up because we have to turn that count into the caterer. And next week we'll go back to our normal, and it's $4 a head. So make sure and sign up. Let us know that so that we can get that turned into the caterer on Monday morning. And I have one other announcement I need to make. If you're doing our daily Bible reading, you'll want to get your pen or pencil out. So I'm just warning you ahead of time. If you're reading along with us on our Bible reading plan and have been doing one chapter a day, just like we've been doing, if you tuned into Facebook, then it's great because we read to you and we told you which chapter. Last week I was working on the bulletin, and we came up, hey, we're starting Psalms next month. And so I put Psalm for the whole week. And I never went back and put the chapters in there. So the reading starting June the 1st, here you go. Here's the first readings. It is Psalm 1, then Psalm 8, 13, 15, and 19. Man, I knew somebody was going to go, bingo. All right, Psalm 1, 8, 13, 15, and 19. That's June 1 through, what is that, the 5th. That should cover us for now. And I'll get those in the bulletin right next time. As always, you can tune in on online and have Josh and I will read those to you. You can read along with us. But those are our selected psalms. I didn't mean for you to have to select a psalm to read. I had somebody ask, are we supposed to read them all? I thought it was one chapter a day, but sorry about that. Tonight is summer series. That changes our order up just a little bit. So Shane Bogus is going to have our opening prayer. Leland Steely is our song leader. We're going to have our song and a prayer, and then we will dismiss our kids to the Kingdom Kids class and to the little kids class. I'll tell you a little bit about our speaker, Patrick Swayne, and then Patrick will speak and he'll offer the invitation, and then Steve Stillwell will have our closing prayer. So again, we are excited. We have looked forward to this moment, and we are just grateful to be here. So let's get started with our devotional time tonight. Leland.
In the land of fadeless day lies a city foursquare. It shall never pass away. And they cannot turn,
Would you pray with me, please? Our Heavenly Father, we come to you this evening just so thankful for the opportunity that we have to gather here tonight and to sing songs of praise and to study from your word and to fellowship with one another. So thankful for the opportunity that we had just a little bit ago to have a good meal and to fellowship with one another. So thankful for the steps of recovery that we've gone so far, and we pray that we can continue to go back down this path that leads to some normalcy. Pray tonight that you're with our speaker. So thankful for the allowing him to be here safely this evening. Pray that you're with him as he's about to come before us, and be with him as he delivers this message. We ask that you're with us as we are here, and then we open our hearts and our minds, and then we can be better because of our time here this evening. We ask that you be with him as he leaves and with his family as well, and let them return home safely. That's especially for those tonight that are sick, those that are hurting, that have upcoming tests and procedures. We ask that you be with them and comfort them as only you can. We also ask that you're with those that are tending to them. We ask that you bless their efforts. Please be with our leaders, dear God, locally and abroad. We ask that when they're making decisions that they can take the time to look at you, and that you may be with them in their decisions. We ask that you forgive us now when we fall short. It's your Son's name we pray. Amen.
All right, we're going to go ahead and turn loose of our kids, head downstairs to the Kingdom Kids class. They have done a rapid transformation from set up for a meal to set up for Kingdom Kids. So we are glad for that. Again, that is 5th grade and under. If you are under 4 years old, your class upstairs is right where it meets on Sunday morning and on Wednesday nights normally. As they're headed out, I'm going to tell you our theme for our entire summer series is traveling light. Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 1 says, "Therefore, since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." And so we're kind of focusing on what he says there, every weight. There's just things that make it harder to travel as you should as a Christian, to walk with Jesus every day. And we're focusing on how can we lay aside some of those weights. And so tonight, Patrick Swayne is with us. Patrick and I met in one of the most unique ways I think I have ever made a friend in ministry. Patrick applied for our youth ministry job, and as he and I talked, that wasn't a good fit, but he and I were a good fit, and we've stayed in touch and have enjoyed several conversations and discussions about everything from Bible to life, and especially coffee. And I was so excited to get a chance to bring Patrick here. It was an accomplishment. It was one that I thought might never happen. When I first met Patrick, he was preaching in Anchorage, Alaska, and his passport would have been required just to get here. He said he needed to move a little closer to home, and so he moved to Arizona. By the way, home was Paducah, Kentucky, where his mother was. So I said not many folks in Paducah would say you moved to Arizona, and that's closer to home, but it was for him. And so Patrick has traveled, by my count, over 1,600 miles to be here tonight. He did dovetail this into a family vacation trip and a few other stops. So we are grateful for that. And Patrick's going to talk to us about control and finding that balance between me being in control and also trusting Jesus. So without any further ado, I won't take any more of your time, Patrick. Thanks for being here tonight.
Okay, good evening, everyone. All right, we just have to double check that to make sure it actually is a good evening. I think you all had a really nice dinner, so I was expecting a more rousing good evening than that. Can I get that, please? Good evening? Good evening. All right, thank you so much for that. That lets us know we're on the same page. I think it's a good evening. I'm very happy to be here. I was just marveling at the kind of the universal truth whenever you come to the services of the Lord's church. You find that in other places, lakeside property is very, very sought after, but baptistry side property is always shunned and avoided, and so everybody kind of goes to the back. I was actually a student preacher in Memphis at the Memphis School of Preaching, and had the opportunity opportunity to go to Hughes, Arkansas one time to fill in for somebody who was over there, and I was so thankful that was not my normal student ministry position. But I went over there, and the reason I was so thankful is because there were like 5 people there on a good day. There were 2 people there that Sunday. It was 2 ladies, and they sat at the back in the corner. And then they sat in such a way so that they could kind of be diagonal from each other, and whenever they felt like it, one would kind of turn around. What do you think about that? You know, like they would just be talking to themselves during the whole time. And so anyway, let's not do that. Let's try to focus on our message tonight. You're not going to do that, are you? You're not going to talk anyway. You're going to focus. Y'all are going to be really good. So anyway, I'm going to be talking tonight on the subject of control. I was actually pretty excited to get this lesson because I've never talked on this subject, but it is certainly something that I believe has been God's continual message for me. And I want to tell you a few stories as we are getting started here. And again, I'll go ahead and set the stage for these stories by saying, when we seek to discover the balance between responsibility and reliance upon God, realize that responsibility is what comes more naturally to us, and we're going to explore that, and that maybe more reliance is what we need. Over and over again, God has tried to teach me a lesson. I'm going to give you 3 occasions where this lesson was being taught to me without me perhaps even realizing it was being taught to me. But I'm going to tell you these 3 stories, and I want you to hold on to them because later on in the lesson, we're going to explore some lessons that I believe you can learn from my 3 stories. So start off when I was a junior in high school. And so junior in high school, and I was at home one day. I don't remember what time of year it was, but I remember that day. It's burned into my memory. The phone rang. And I picked up the phone, and the person was asking for Mr. Swayne. And now, so my mom was a single mom for that period of her life, and so I knew whenever anybody asked for Mr. Swayne, it's like a telemarketer or something. There was no Mr. Swayne. I'm not Mr. Swayne. I'm in the 11th grade, and so I was actually holding the phone like this. I was preparing to hang it up, all right, because I knew it was just going to be nothing, but it was not only something, it was something really tragic. They told me that my mom had been in a terrible car accident, and that she had to be life-flighted to the hospital, and she was in ICU. And so that's the news that I got over the phone. So hold on to that story, and we're going to talk more about that later on. Next story that I want to tell you is a story that happened 6 years later. I've had an interesting road, and not in a road that I've created intentionally for myself, just responding to things like when somebody asks me to go somewhere. He doesn't know this, but if he asked me to go, I was going to always try to get over here some way, one way or the other. So I always try to respond to invites, because if you don't respond, you never get invited back. So, but anyway, I've always tried to do that, and I had the opportunity to move overseas. I went on a short-term mission trip to Melbourne, Australia, and they, for whatever reason, unbeknownst to me, asked a 21-year-old, I turned 21 on that trip, they asked a 21-year-old to come and work with them as a minister. And I thought, well, actually went home, and I felt really bad about it. I was like in my mind over and over and over again, I had that verse, come into Macedonia and help us. I just kept on hearing that over and over again. I was like, all right, come on, I've got to do this. And so I ended up actually staying in that ministry position for another year where I was preaching in East Tennessee. But I thought, here's my timeline, and I'm still 21, coming on 22. Here's my timeline. Okay, so I've left my ministry position in July. I'm going to go around raising support, and then I'm going to be in Australia by October. And I have no idea how the world works, at this point in my life. And so the support raising came okay because I set the bar incredibly low. I'll tell you about that in just a second. But what ended up happening was I was ready to go, but they weren't ready to have me. I couldn't get a work visa for, I actually went to Australia the next year, May of 2008. And this was October of 2007 when I thought I was going to go. And I was in limbo during that whole time. By the way, if anybody is ever in limbo, please do not ask them every single Sunday and every Wednesday when you're going to be going over, because that's what happened to me every single Sunday, every single Wednesday. And I was just so incredibly frustrated at that time in my life, because I felt like, at that time in my life, I was not okay with not preaching. I felt like I really needed to do this. And even to to the point where I was pulling out these places where people were looking for preachers. I had a 4-hour radius of where I was staying, and I was like writing these places, and I was saying, hey, if you will let me come and preach for you, I will do that. It would be awesome if you could pay me for fuel, but you don't even have to do that. I just wanted to go and be of service to somebody somewhere, and it just wasn't happening. Of course, I mean, like, who's going to, like a 21-year-old saying, you're going to come preach for us? Great, amazing. So nobody wanted that. So I was just so frustrated, and my prayers during that time were just so angry because I was trying to take control. And hold on to that story. One more. So this is actually the year after that. I'm not changing my slides properly. This was the year after that. So when I finally made it to Australia, does 08, 09, does that period ring any bells for anyone? Yeah, right? So I went over there, and I went over there on what would have been a pretty meager bachelor's budget in the States. And I went over there, and my U.S. dollar was like 80 cents to their $1 Australian dollar, and so that was okay. And then the global financial crisis, the dollar tanked, and I found that my American dollar took $1.10 to buy $1 Australian dollar. And as that wore on, I actually, God opened doors for me with all of that move that I couldn't even have expected. I ended up I went over there thinking I'm going to be single for a long time, and God allowed me to meet my wife, which I'm very sorry that you're not getting to meet. My boys are staying with her sick. They're here in town, but that's about as close as they can get as watching us online right now. But anyway, God opened this wonderful door for me, and I was over there. I'd gotten married at this point. This was in 09. But that whole thing was just weighing on me so much because now I've got a wife. Now I'm supposed to, and the dollar just kept on getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And I couldn't do anything. I was actually, for the first period of our marriage, I was on a religious worker visa, which means the only job that I could have was the one I had. And so I couldn't get a job. We didn't have any money. My wife was thankfully working at that time, but I didn't feel good about that. I felt like, we should be able to survive off of what I'm making. That was my mentality at that time. And so just incredibly frustrated once again and looking for a solution. So hold on to those 3 stories if you don't mind. I'm gonna revisit all of those later on. I want us to understand that it's moments and situations like these where we find out how fragile we are. We find out how little control we actually have, how even though we have things lined up in our mind of the way that things are supposed to be and the way that things are going to go, they just don't always go that way. It might be that this evening, it might be that you don't experience that kind of thing, or you've never experienced that kind of thing, but I dare say you probably have. And I dare say if nothing else, you've at least experienced 2020, where all of us kind of got that lesson, where we had all these plans and all these things that we expected to do and it didn't work out that way. So we need to reflect upon the idea of control. And we need to think about our ideas of control. Why is it so frustrating to us when we find that we're not able to do what we want to do? There are other cultures and other customs and places, countries, that are handling this thing a whole lot better than we are here in America. And I'll tell you that about the pandemic. Just the idea of having life changed and life redirected in a different route. And the reason that we're having such a hard time with it is because, again, of the way that we view control. So let's talk about this as we get into our first point. We're going to ask the question, how much control do I actually have? And so follow me on a little bit of a journey in philosophy for just a moment. I don't usually like to do this, but there's a point to all of this, all right? So how much control do we have? 3 terms I want you to be acquainted with as you think about the idea of control. The first one of these terms is the term fatalism. I want you to think about fatalism. And so fatalism is the belief that events are predetermined and therefore inevitable. And so if you want that visualized for you, then basically realize that with fatalism, it doesn't matter what you do, you're coming to an inevitable conclusion. You're going to reach that no matter what happens. It doesn't matter what you do, you're going to arrive at a certain point. And there are people in the world that, again, have accepted 2020 with, in stride, because this is what obviously was meant to happen in my life. And again, that's the way that some people view their world and the idea of control. As you think about fatalism, moving closer along the scale, you're going to find that a lot of A lot of our evolutionary friends who don't believe in the idea of free will because it doesn't mesh with the idea of evolutionary theory, they believe in something called determinism. Now, determinism is a little bit different. Every event in nature is the result of determined or prior or coexisting events. And so basically, when you're thinking about determinism, realize that what you do matters, but you do what you do because of what people have done before you, what people are doing around you. And all of these things kind of contribute to an inevitable conclusion. You're gonna reach this conclusion because you're kind of programmed to reach it. You don't really have free will. You're just moving along with your evolutionary impulses. And so what you do is relevant, but it's controlled. It's not really that you have free will. You hear both of those ideas, and I'm sure that you're kind of balking at both of them. You're saying, well, that's not how things are. That's not the way that the world works. And so we move away from determinism to the other side of the scale, and we come to this idea of free will. Free will, just one definition of it, is the freedom of humans to make choices that are not determined by prior causes or by divine intervention. You have to be very careful with that last part, don't you? Divine intervention. But we have the freedom to make our choices. A lot of people think that that's the way that all of this works. We don't have control. No, we do, and we have free will. As you're reflecting upon that, though, and thinking about that conclusion of saying, all right, this is where we are, we have free will, I want you to think about the implications of that and think about the way that we live sometimes. We see a homeless man on the street, and what comes to our mind when we see that homeless man? If only he worked harder. If only he if only he had more education and he was able to take advantage of that education and then able to get himself a job or something. If only he showed some determination, then he wouldn't be in that set of circumstances. We see someone in that condition, and if we're not very, very careful, then we blame them for where they are. What about a parent or a friend or a loved one who has had the very tragic experience of losing a child in a drowning incident? We've had several of our friends or acquaintances who have had that happen. And what happens after that? The conversation plays both in the minds of the parents and the minds of everyone around. Why did this happen? And it's always because there was some issue with control. The parents should not have let this child be at the pool at this time or by themselves. The people who owned the pool, they should have had a fence around that pool to protect that child. There wasn't a fence. They're responsible. We're going to sue that person, and we're going to make sure that they're held responsible for not putting safety measures into place. And again, we think that way because of the idea of control. When tragedies and challenges of all kinds strike, and I could go on and on with those kind of illustrations, but when these kind of challenges and these tragedies strike, where do we turn, both for blame and for solutions? We look in the mirror and we say, it's here. I'm responsible. The people live with guilt because of that for a long time. Those parents of those loved ones who have drowned, those children that have drowned, they live with guilt. And people in similar circumstances live with guilt. And people look at that homeless man and they say, well, there are solutions inside of that man if only he would do something about his circumstance. When we succeed, it's the opposite. Instead of looking at ourselves in the mirror and blaming ourselves, we look at ourselves in the mirror and think about how great we are. We give ourselves praise. We think about how wonderful we are doing. And so again, is that really the way that the world works? I'm going to suggest that when we ask the question, how much control do we have, we're actually beginning at the wrong point. We're beginning at the wrong point. I want you to think with me about the fact that we should be asking this question instead. How much control does God have? And I put as big of a font on this and as bold as a font as I could have on this. Do you see what it says there? How much control does God have? All of it. He has all control. Please understand that about God. And please do not limit God in any way. What does the Bible say about God and His control? Even the creation, Paul says, even the creation screams out to us two inescapable truths. And one of those inescapable truths is this, that God possesses eternal power. I don't know what that communicates to you, but the idea of eternal power, I both think eternal both in terms of time, both in terms of, or I don't know if he'd say both, but there's several things it communicates. In terms of time, in terms of his ability, in terms of his control, he has an eternality of power. And even as you look at the earliest, perhaps, of Scripture, if some people think Job is an early book, some people think it might have come at the time of Solomon. Either way, we're dealing with a person who probably lived post-flood, pre-Abraham. And so post-flood, pre-Abraham, we have a man saying, I know to God, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. You can do all things, and no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Not by man's decisions, by man's stubbornness, by man's obstinance. No purpose of God can be thwarted. How that worked in the Old Testament, I don't know. But in the New Testament period, we're kind of left with a very inescapable conclusion about this. Jesus has this control, this power, this authority. As he says in Matthew 28:18, all authority has been given to me in heaven and earth. Well, where are you? Are you in earth? Are you in heaven? Well, you got to be in one of those two places. And guess what? Jesus has control, all of it, in those places. Not only that, but the very idea that I am able to do anything in life, if I have a proper understanding of that, I have an understanding that I am enabled to do that by Jesus Christ. He upholds, the Hebrews writer says, he upholds all things by the word of his power. I don't know if you ever sat down and like engaged the Scripture this way, but like 2 Corinthians chapter 8, for example. You're reading in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, and Paul says, let me tell you about the grace that God showed the Macedonians. Okay, what grace did God show the Macedonians? All right, well, let's read there. They were in deep poverty, they were in deep affliction, and they gave. Wait, what? I thought you were going to tell me about what God did for them or to them. You just told me what they did. Oh, that was the grace of God bestowed upon them? The fact that they were able to do something wonderful, beautiful, and positive? That actually came from God? And God was to be given glory for that ability that they had? Oh, absolutely. That's the way that Paul looked at it. That's the way New Testament people look at it. In fact, Paul says in Colossians chapter 1 and verses 16 and 17 that in him all things consist, literally all things hold together in him. All things. As you're thinking about that with me, and you're thinking about this notion that we have of free will, I know that there's probably some people who are listening to me say all of this, and you're saying, well, Patrick, are you saying that we are living in a fatalistic kind of world? Are you saying that God dictates and man follows those dictates? And have you become a Calvinist or something like that? Well, no, absolutely not. I am not a Calvinist. I am not a fatalist. I don't view the world like that at all. But I understand something about this world. I understand that even though I have been given free will, even though I have been given the ability to choose and to decide and to create and to subdue, that all exists because of God, and that God hasn't just stepped out of the picture. Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, if you open your Bibles there, this is what our creation mandate was. And it does say that we do have a degree of control in this world that God created. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 26, God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. We are made in the image of God, and I don't know all that means. I know it's not implying physicality in any way. I don't know all that means, but I know at the very least it means that I have a degree of God-given dominion. We do have some control over ourselves and over the way that this world functions. But again, any understanding that we have of free will has to be rooted in an understanding of God's will. And that God is ultimately the one who's in control. I don't have time to explore this idea as much as I would love to do, but I want to at least expose this idea to you, and you can go off and study it more. But when you're thinking about God and his will for mankind, realize that there is first of all, God's revealed will. What is that? This shouldn't be too hard. What is that? That's the Bible. There is nothing that I can do to change the pages of this book. And please understand that when you ask David to preach the funeral sermon for someone who's passed away and maybe they were in the world and didn't know Christ, there is nothing that he or anyone can do to change what's in this book. He can say all that he wants, but it's not going to change what's here. God's revealed will is immutable, fixed, unchangeable. Now, as we think about God's will, though, and what is fixed, immutable, unchangeable, it's not just the revealed will of God. Have you ever thought about the fact that he has a final will as relates to mankind? You think about all the way back in the book of Exodus, you think about Pharaoh. So God says that I am going to bring my people out of this land and into a good land, a large land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So Pharaoh hears that purpose of God, and what does Pharaoh say? No. And again, when the first plague happens, no. The second plague happens, no. The third plague happens, no. Over and over again, he says, no, no, no. And because Pharaoh was so hard-hearted and so stubborn, and because he kept saying no and no and no over and over again, he ended up thwarting the purpose of God, denying the truth of Job. Job didn't know what he was talking about. Is that what happened? No. What happened? He put his foot down and he said, these people are not going to go. And what ended up happening? They left. They not only left, but they were given riches to leave by the Egyptians. They left. God's purposes march forward no matter what. And we have to realize that is at work in our world today. There are going to be things that you don't want to happen that do, no matter what you do. There are going to be things that you pray about and that a lot of people pray about, that you want to change, you want to alter, and they don't. Because God clearly had some kind of final will in that area. But that doesn't mean that that's the only way that God's will operates. You see, God's will also has what I'm going to call a circumstantial aspect. Jonah goes into the city of Nineveh and he says, yet 40 days and Nineveh shall be overthrown. That's a message from God. But 40 days come and go, and what happened to Nineveh? Was it overthrown? No. Why? Because the circumstances changed. And when the circumstances changed, God changes his decree sometimes. He does that. And that ought to impress you about our God, because even though he has total control, he yields an aspect of that control to us and allows us to make decisions. But it ultimately all goes back when he allows us to make those decisions, when he empowers us to make those good decisions, it all goes back to him and to his glory. I want us to think about some well-intentioned but false ideas of control. I'm going to give you three. You're going to find that if you explore these three, you're going to find that you're going to be able to think of others. And so this is not by no means meant to be an exhaustive list, just trying to get our minds thinking about a few things. So first of these three, God only helps those who help themselves. You ever heard that before? False. Not true. There are people who they don't have much intelligence. They don't have much ability. They stumble upon an opportunity, and because of that, they are made incredibly wealthy. I mean, you think about what's happening with the cryptocurrency stuff right now. I mean, is that really people like they're just super intelligent and they know all that's going on? There are people who are gaining hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars on that. People who are losing all of that money on that, and all that's happening right now. It's just this set of circumstances that really people don't control, and it's not because of skill. Although you talk to somebody who does that stuff, and they will tell you all day long it's because of skill. No, it's not. And as much as this sometimes makes me uncomfortable to think about, when wealth is extended, the Bible says it has a source. 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 17. 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 17. We could also look at James chapter 1. It depends on how you view wealth. Wealth isn't always a good and perfect gift, but where do all those come from? God, right? And please be willing to say that. Please do not shy away from the fact that if you have something good and perfect in your life, that it came from God. All right? But 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 17, Paul gives a message to the preacher Timothy to encourage those who are wealthy in his congregation, command those who are rich in this present age, not to be haughty, not to be prideful about the fact that they are rich, nor to trust in their uncertain riches, nor to live as though these things are going to be their salvation, but to trust instead in the living God, who, and highlight it for this point, who gives us richly all things to enjoy. We had the blessing of eating this afternoon at Fuddruckers. You ever been there before? Awesome hamburger. I love a good hamburger. And we were eating there, and there was this guy that he was just super attentive. My son, as I said, he started. I didn't say this, did I? Actually, I said it at the beginning. Right, never mind. But anyway, my youngest son had a fever around lunchtime, and so we come in, and but this guy noticed that my son is like sleepy and all this, and he's like, "Hey, how about a cookie?" And he gives my son a cookie. And then he sees me struggling to take all the baskets back, and he says, "Let me help you with those." And his job is to go around and clean off the tables. That's what he's doing. But what is he doing as he's going around cleaning off the tables? He's working incredibly hard. Incredibly hard. You're not going to tell me that someone who's a CEO in some office in New York is working harder than him. And yet, what's happening? That person in New York gets paid millions of dollars. That man might be making the minimum wage. I don't know. But you cannot tell me that wealth is about ability and skill and us helping ourselves. No, in ways beyond my understanding, it's about God giving blessings. Now, he holds accountable those to whom he gives wealth. Believe that. But at the same time, it comes ultimately from him. And so God only helps those who help themselves. The next idea, I actually read this in an article once. God has a healing team consisting of doctors, of nurses, and medicine. There was a young man. I used to teach at a Bible college in Singapore, and there was a young man who came in to chapel one day, and he led a prayer, and he said, God, please make sure that this brother takes his pills so that he can get better. And I was like, that's all at once, too much and too little. Because God is not going to, in the way that I understand is operating in the world, I don't know that God is going to force anyone to take their medicine. But to say that God can only work through that medicine, I'm also not willing to say that. I'm not willing to say that. Exodus chapter 15 and verse 26. Exodus chapter 15 and verse 26, we'd have gone to James 5 with this point as well. And think about how the effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails, and that in that context is discussed the idea of sickness. But if Exodus chapter 15 and verse 26, I want you to hear what the Lord says to the Israelites. And said, if you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments, keep all his statutes, this is God speaking, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. I am the Lord who heals you. When you see the book of Job, you see what happens behind the scenes, don't you? Why does someone lose their health? Because of Satan. Why does someone have their health? Because of God. I am the Lord who heals you. Now, am I going to say that God doesn't use doctors and doesn't use medicine and we should just go naturopath or whatever? I'm not one of those kind of people. Believe me, I'm not. Right? But I'm also not a person who is so frightened about fighting the idea, which I think it's an idea that we need to fight to a degree. So frightened of fighting the idea that miraculous gifts have come to an end. The reason I fight that idea is because I don't like what is the conclusion of that all the time. Miraculous gifts, people believe those things still continue. What do they also believe continues? Revelation from God. I read Jude 3 and I see something very different. I'm to contend for the faith which was once and for all delivered to the saints, right? We don't have new revelation, and that's where that all the time leads. These people thinking, "Oh, I can do these things, and I can, speak on behalf of God." No, you cannot. But anyway, we fight that idea so hard sometimes. We fight this idea of miraculous gifts so hard sometimes that we confine God to this box, and we feel as though He has no power over the world today. I don't know that God relinquished the right to be the God who heals. He is the God who heals. And if someone gets better, who are you going to thank? By all means, thank the doctors, thank the nurses, thank the person who created the medicine, but please thank God. Please thank God. And don't assume in your prayer life that those people who are doctors and nurses have everything about this case figured out. And don't assume that God is not doing things that they don't understand, because He is. There are many times. My mom was told, just to move ahead with a little bit of that story I'm going to revisit later, my mom was told she'd never walk again. Now, was her recovery like absolute? No, but she walked again. Doctors don't know everything. And who enabled her to walk again? God. He gave her that blessing that Satan had taken away from her for a period. Third saying that I want us to reflect upon, and this is a bugbear. God won't place upon us more than we can bear. That's a pun. You get a bugbear? Bear. Anyway, God won't place upon us more than we can bear. Right? You ever heard someone say that before? This statement assumes that God is up there as He is relinquishing control. And He's up there and He's giving you freedom, but with the intention of giving you problems, and He's only going to give you as many problems as you can hold on to and bear by yourself. And someone else has more problems because obviously they're a stronger person than you, and you have fewer problems than that person because you are weaker or something like that. I don't really know what people all mean by saying this, but I want you to understand that that's not why God allows bad things to happen to you. Now, in saying this, this lesson is going to get you to think, I hope, because the problem of pain, suffering, and evil is a problem that cannot be answered in my lesson or even in my lifetime. I work on that all the time, trying to think about that. Anybody who gives you a 15 or a 45-minute answer to that question doesn't understand the question. But I do understand something about God. When David asked for a scripture reference to go with my lesson, I said, well, at least we're going to look at this one. 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse number 8. 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse number 8. Listen to how Paul describes his circumstances. See if it meshes with this commonly practiced saying. 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse number 8. We do not want you to be ignorant, brethren. We don't want you not to know of our trouble which came to us in Asia, that we were burdened. Listen to how he describes his burden. Beyond measure. We were burdened beyond our ability to measure or comprehend our burden. Above strength. We were burdened to the point that we could not bear it. We could not hold it. We could not endure it. Above strength. So that we despised or despaired even of life. We thought we were going to die. We didn't see a solution. We didn't believe there would be one. And in fact, to emphatically state that in verse 9, yes, we had the sentence of death in ourselves. Why did you put me in that situation, God? That we should not trust in ourselves, but in God who raises the dead. If you believe that God raises the dead, then you believe that God can do the impossible. Please do not fail to apply that belief to other circumstances in life. You're not meant to. Again, I don't know that God has relinquished the right of healing in this world. I don't know that He has relinquished the right of doing the impossible in this world. And He puts us in situations that we simply cannot bear so that we will learn to trust Him and learn that the God who does the impossible can get us out of that situation that to us seems impossible. In fact, Paul says in verse 10, who delivered us from so great a death and does deliver us, in whom we trust that He will still deliver us. What a beautiful thought. What an amazing and powerful thought. But sadly, a thought that too many Christians live without because they're trying to hold on to control. I want to tell you about those 3 stories and learn what you can learn from my examples about control and what we learn when we don't have control. So I'm going back to my 11th grade school year and got that call that Mom had been in that car accident. And honestly, I don't remember what happened after that. I don't know how I got anywhere. I was in my 11th grade year, but I was one of those kids. I started driving when I was 17, and so I didn't have my license yet. So I couldn't get anywhere. There's no one in the house. Somehow, I got to church after that. Somehow, I had meals after that. Somehow, not only did those things happen, but my mom had she had worked and put herself through school. She had become a massage therapist. She was working at nights, sleeping during the day. She had just gotten this car when it was totaled, and it was a used car, but it was her first new car in a long time. And so the house had there was no man in the house. The house had gotten into a state of disrepair. I was never taught how to do any of that stuff. Please be gentle, older men, when you come across these younger men who don't know how to do things with cars and houses and stuff. Sometimes Dad wasn't around to teach that kind of stuff, and we don't have a clue. I have no clue. And but anyway, we just in that circumstance, the house was dirty, but somehow it got cleaned. And somehow Mom got back from the hospital. How did all that happen? How did all that happen? You know how it all happened? The church. The church is how it all happened. The Lord's church stepped in and did everything that I could have ever asked for and more. I wasn't asking, they were doing. And when I think about that and I think about my God, I realize this about these situations in which I believe that I just do not have control anymore. God already has a plan in place to take care of you. You just don't know how powerful it is yet. He had the church there. I was a part of that church there. And they loved me more than I understood. They loved my mom more than I understood. And they made sure that we were not without. When I think about that time in my life, do you know how much that taught me when I went through that set of circumstances? You know how much I learned not only about the way that life works, but about the way that God works through his people? God did amazing things through that time. It was terrible, awful in the moment, but God did amazing things. God already has a plan in place to take care of you. 5 or 6 years later, when I was waiting on that work visa, and I was frustrated, I was angry. God, why have you seemingly? I'm a person who believes in providential pathways. I honestly do. I don't believe in one fixed destination for us, but I believe that when things kind of seem to be lining up in a certain way, that this is the way you need to go. And what actually happened, it's a weird story that got me to Australia. I was in preaching school, and I actually had a teacher come in, and he was going to go to Singapore. And he said, does anybody here want to go to Singapore with me? And I said, yeah, I'll go with you. I went to Singapore. I met a man from Australia in Singapore. And this opened the opportunity for me to go on this short-term mission trip. Now, that man that I met from Australia, who was in Singapore, back in Australia, who arranged all this travel for me, was the person who received me at the airport and all of that. He told everyone over there that, this guy, he's coming over here for a tryout. And of course I was not, and so it's just weird, like all these things just kind of fell into place. And then I was ready to go, and I'd left my job, and I couldn't get any other job. I couldn't preach, and I was working at Target, and I was so frustrated. And people were asking me, when are you going over? I don't know what I'm going over. Do you know that the future that God has in store for you is better than the one that you imagined for yourself? You know what would have happened had I gone over? See, that older man who had met me in Singapore, who invited me to come over, was an older, kind of semi-retired preacher. And I arrived in May of 2008, and I said, where is this guy? He was not there. You see, I had actually, I wasn't so foolhardy. I'd actually accepted this position with the belief that I was going to be learning from this older preacher. And I thought, that he's going to be there. But do you know what happened? He broke the hearts of that church about a month before I arrived. There was a gospel meeting, and he just didn't show up. Come to find out, he had moved 3 hours away without telling anybody. Absolutely broke the hearts of that church. Absolutely made life terrible for me for a while, to be honest. because if you want to have a hard work to walk into, it's a work where the preacher has just ruined everybody's confidence in preachers. That's a hard situation to be in, right? But what if I had been there for all of that? Would I have had the wisdom to know that what that guy was doing was not right at that time in my life? I don't know. And would I have had the opportunity while I was so frustrated and waiting to have this beautiful woman start emailing me from another congregation there in Australia, and to establish this relationship that built up to the point, thanks Gospel Grapevine, that when I arrived there in Melbourne, the men sat me down in the first business meeting, and they're like, you can go and visit your girlfriend. And I'm like, I didn't even know I had a girlfriend. I hadn't met her. There was that, but that was all. That all was in place. And then I went over there and I got to meet the woman who was who ended up being my wife. Would all of that have happened some other way? I don't know. But I look back at all of that and I say, wow, what an amazing future God gave me after that terribly frustrating time in my life. And number 3, as you think about that global financial crisis and what happened, I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story, and so bear with me. I've got a little bit of time left so I can do this. So, didn't have any money, and I was like, I was trying desperately to find a solution. And so a solution kind of seemed to arrive. My wife was working at a gym. The owner wanted to sell this gym, and she had been working in this business for a long time. And so we thought, well, this is going to be the perfect opportunity. We're going to buy this gym, and we're going to have a business. We're going to have passive income. Everybody, small business owners, we all want to have passive income. And so we thought, well, this is where we're going to be. And we'll work a little bit hard, and then we'll be able to set ourselves up, and we'll be able to provide for ourselves in ministry. And that's what I thought was going to happen. And we go to the bank. You don't have any collateral. You don't have a house, you don't have property, you don't have anything. We're not giving you any money to buy a business. Bank number 2, same story. Bank number 3, same story. Every bank in Australia, same story. Nobody wants to lend us any money. And so we go to some Christians in the congregation who actually have a small business, and we talk to them about this, and we say, well, what should we do? Is there anything that we don't realize about this? And what they decided to do was they decided that they were going to become co-signers for us on this loan. What a blessing. Except for, did you read the book of Proverbs before? What does Proverbs say about co-signing? No bueno. Do not co-sign is what the Proverbs say. That creates difficult situations in relationships. We ended up going back anyway on a reporting trip. And in the course of that reporting trip, we became more and more convicted that this whole business thing was a bad idea. And more convicted that we really needed to put all of our efforts into ministry. And what sealed it for me, I was actually at an event called Polishing the Pulpit, and there were this thing called the Graybeards Forum, and these old men were up there. What do you regret most about your preaching life? One of them actually said, I regret having owned a business early in my ministry. And I was like, what on earth? That's what I heard. And so my wife and I were like doing separate things at Polishing the Pulpit. It's this big thing. And so we were at different places. We came together, and at the same time we were like, we need not to do this. We can't do this. And at that point, thank God, even though we had spent money and gone a little bit down the road, we were able to get out of it. We hadn't signed any paperwork yet. We'd engaged a lawyer, and so we had to pay for that. But you know what happened? Even though we'd come to this great realization, that family over there who had extended themselves in this relationship, they were heartbroken that we didn't do this. And not only that, even though I have a different understanding, I'll be honest, about let your yes be yes and your no be no. I hadn't signed any papers yet. And he thought, well, your yes should be yes, your no should be no. And it drove a wedge in that relationship. And a wedge that I have never been able to, and I've tried over the years. I've at various points reached out and said, I'm so sorry for the way I behaved. that relationship never was restored. It was a cross-cultural relationship, and it meant something more to them than I'll ever understand what they did for me. And so I think about that, and I realize something about my efforts to control things. My efforts to control things instead of trusting God can actually make the situation worse. Now, is it wrong to try to own a business or to try to support yourself in business? I'm not saying any of that. What I am saying is that where I have to be incredibly careful with the way I exercise my free will is when God has told me something about the decision I'm about to make. I didn't consult the Proverbs. I didn't reflect on that at all. And in fact, when I look at that period of my life, I was not praying enough about that decision. And because I didn't pray enough about it, and because I didn't consult God about it, I made a decision and I made things worse. Now again, I don't know, maybe all that happened so that I could share this story with people and teach people about the value of going into the Proverbs, but I don't know. You know, you think about all these things and you wonder. You don't have to wonder about this. When you think about control, and you think about the idea of responsibility and reliance, please know this. God is going to hold you responsible for your behavior. But as you step out in faith, know this. You can rely upon God. Every time. And God, and this is one of my favorite verses as I think about control, I think about the future, and I think about the way that God operates. Ephesians 3:20-21. You know that verse, right? God is able to do exceedingly, abundantly, above all that we ask or think. Exceedingly, abundantly, above all that we ask or think. Not only can you trust God, but you can be sure that the future, again, that God has in store for you is far, far better than anything that you could possibly even imagine, let alone ask or even think about. This evening, as you're reflecting upon all of that with me and you're thinking about this wonderful God, it might be that you're holding on to control. Please don't hold on to control for a moment longer. It's time to leave that behind. That is a weight. It is a weight that will produce pride if good things happen in your life. It is a weight that will produce guilt if bad things happen in your life. You don't need that weight. Please lay it aside. The opportunity to lay it aside is by fixing your eyes upon Jesus and by committing your life to Him. If you don't know what that means, I don't have enough time to actually talk to you about what all that means. But what I do have time to do and what I would love to do is to sit down with you and we'll open up a Bible and we'll start looking at how Christians gave their lives to God, how they responded to the gospel message, a message of resurrection by themselves being buried in water and by rising from that water to walk in new lives. I'd love to talk to you about that. Please give me the opportunity to do that. And if you have done that, but the new life that you're living is a whole lot like the old life that you used to live in that you are just holding on to control, now's the time to commit to something different. And if there's anything that we can help you with, believe me, the church is here to help you. Please let us know how we can help while we stand and sing this song of invitation.
When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I
Heavenly Father, we come to you this evening just thanking you for the day.